Good evening, friends. A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for logging in. I'm Dr. Archana Tandon, a gynecologist by profession and a passionate photographer. I believe that each one of us should give in our best to master the subjects of our choices, for which one should skill oneself in the subject by learning skills and educating oneself properly. So I did my MBBS in obs-gynae to give in my best as a gynecologist and did a diploma in photography to pursue my passion. Giving free education is the social service that I had longed to do for the society for long in subjects that I know something about. So today's topic is perfecting shutter priority mode, and let us learn to make use of shutter priority creatively for sports, for wildlife photography, for long exposure photography, astrophotography, and nighttime photography. Also, let us discuss how to create ghost stories making use of shutter priority mode. Imagine creating a three-headed Vishnu avatar using shutter priority mode. Well, we will be discussing all about it in this session. So why the need for controlling shutter speed? Well, if you watch these birds floating and performing actions, if you watch these wild animals walking, and uh, if we want to capture them, we need to control the shutter speed to allow light to pass through for the duration of time that we choose by setting the shutter speed to catch fast or slow actions. So, fast actions are performed by wildlife and in sports, and if we need to catch them, we need to control our shutter speed. So, it's mostly used in wildlife photography, and in sports, we need them to avoid blur and to catch sharp images of moving subjects and not to lose the shot. Supposedly, if the subject moves out of the frame while clicking. So we have to be very fast. So fast shutter speed is also used to capture motion and speed, like in this shot, and slow shutter speeds are used for long exposure shots. We have looked into the exposure triangle in our previous sessions, and for a proper exposure, we need enough light, which the aperture in the lens allows to get in, and the light should get in for a proper period of time, which is controlled by the shutter, which is inside our cameras, and also by the sensitivity of the sensor, which is present inside our camera, in front of which we have the shutter. So the exposure is determined by the light entering, the time for which the light is entering, and the amount of light falling on the sensor for that duration of time. So shutter is the unit which controls the amount of time that allows light to enter and fall on the sensor. So this is controlled by the shutter. So how do we control the shutter speed? So these are the dials present in different cameras, which are used to control shutter speed. Some have S written. We match them with the marker present in our camera to set shutter as the mode of choice. Some have TV written on them. We match it with the mark marker on the camera, and some, like Fuji cameras, have the shutter speeds denoted itself in the dial, and you rotate the dial and you get the shutter speed. So these dials are used to allow a set amount of time that the shutter opens and closes. This is known as shutter speed. If we need more light, we set a slower shutter speed, and if we need less light, we set a faster shutter speed. So if you can imagine a curtain uh, opening and closing, so if you want the visibility instantaneously, you can open the curtain very fast. If you want the visibility to the what is visible to the audience to appear in a slow motion, then the curtains are opened slowly. Logical, isn't it? So let us look at it in detail and look at where the shutter speed is represented. In a digital camera, so once you have set the shutter speed using the dial, and where do you look for what shutter speed you will be using? So look for it on the LCD screen. You can look for it on the LCD screen at the top of the camera, behind the camera, or in the viewfinder. So in this LCD screen, you find it here represented by a fraction 1 by 200. In this LCD, you find it as 8,000. So some cameras have it in fractions like this. Some indicate in full numbers, though they represent fraction of a second only, but they are written as numbers. And in a viewfinder, you can locate it just in the numbers or the whatever is written below the viewfinder. You can find it here, like here it is 80. So if you cannot locate this shutter speed in your viewfinder or LCD screen, do go through your camera manual to locate it. So now let us talk about how does shutter actually work in a DSLR. So we have seen this diagram in previous sessions. The light enters through the aperture, and when we press the shutter halfway, this is reflected by the mirror onto the viewfinder and we see the image. But when we want to click it, we press the shutter whole through and whole way down, and then this mirror goes up, and the shutter which is in front of the sensor, that opens up to expose the sensor behind, and light falls on the sensor to create an image. And this is how the shutter works. The shutter has two curtains, one posterior one which is towards the sensor, one anterior one which is towards the lens. The posterior shutter opens first, then the anterior curtain opens. Similarly, when the shutter closes, the posterior curtain closes first and then the anterior curtain. And if we look at from the front, this is how the shutter opens and closes. In a mirrorless camera, this mirror is which we saw in DSLR is missing. So the light straightforward enters through the aperture and falls on the sensor and creates an image. In some mirrorless cameras, you do have a shutter in front of the sensor. But in small mirrorless cameras, they have now removed the shutter curtain too. And it is simply that the image sensor becomes active for the set duration of time at which the shutter speed is set to. So the sensor becomes active for that time which you set by the shutter speed. So by seeing these three images, you can very well imagine that this is a slow shutter speed, and the sensor is seen to be open quite for some time. This is a medium shutter speed, and the sensor is seen for a lesser duration of time, and for fast shutter speed, the sensor is hardly visible for a very, very short duration of time. So the camera shutter controls the duration time that the light enters the camera and the sensor is exposed. The length of time that the shutter opens is known as shutter speed. If we need more light, we set the shutter to open for a longer time. If we need less light, we set the shutter to open for a shorter duration of time. Shutter speeds are measured and will appear in the settings as seconds and fractions of a second. So you must be familiar with the numbers 2, 4, 15, and these are in fraction of a second. And if you see two inverted commas to one side of the number, then that indicates for how many seconds the shutter will open. So that doesn't mean that we cannot expose the sensor for a duration that can be few minutes. We can by making use of a mode present in the shutter priority mode, which is known as bulb mode, and it is represented by capital B, bulb mode. So for very long exposures, we use bulb mode. So the shutter speeds appear as 1 by 4, 1 by 8, 1 by 15, 1 by 30, 1 by 60, 1 by 500, 1 by 1000, 1 by 2000, and 1 by 4000, and it goes on. So slower the speed, 1 by 4, 1 by 8, more the light that goes in because the shutter moves slowly, allowing the uh, sh- uh, sensor to be open for a longer time, and the motion is caught in at a slower pace, and that causes blur because the subject moves and a blur appears. So if we make use of faster shutter speeds, less light enters and less motion is caught as an exposure onto the sensor, and the image appears to be sharper. So we will be making use of this knowledge, and we'll see how we plan to take our captures creatively in the forthcoming slides. So all cameras do not represent it in fractions, but they appear just as numbers. I've already told you, though they stand for fraction of a second only. How does one differentiate these from seconds? Well, seconds are represented by two inverted commas on top of the numbers on one side. So you can see the shutter speed like this or like this in fractions or in whole numbers, and seconds will be seen with inverted commas onto one side. So if see on LCD screen, here is the shutter speed, or on the upper LCD screen, here is the shutter speed. On viewfinder, here is the shutter speed, and adjusting this dial in Fuji camera, you set your shutter speed. If still not able to locate, check your camera's manual. This is very important. So have you located where the shutter speed is represented on your camera? This is one of the key questions after all this discussion up till now, for we are aiming to skill ourselves to the next level, that is to master the manual mode, So please put in all the efforts to identify where the shutter speed is represented and located and seen on your cameras. This is how the shutter opens and closes. So we are now going to turn our attention to shutter priority mode and how to make use of it for our shots, about which we just made a mention in our previous sessions. So shutter priority mode is a semi-automatic mode, sometimes appears as TV time value. You can set shutter speed. Camera will control the rest of the parameters for an exposure, that is ISO and aperture. Controlling shutter speed allows motion and movement to be frozen or blurred. It is fun experimenting with shutter speeds for creative shots. Control is still limited as the aperture and ISO is still controlled by the camera. Controlling dials are in front and at the back of the camera. So in such type of cameras, you uh, put the TV value onto this marker or the S onto this marker and controlled by these dials present in front or at the back of the camera. And Fuji has a direct control through this dial. So bulb mode, as I talked in the previous slide, while exploring, you will come across this mode mentioned as bulb or B mode. This is setting that allows the shutter to remain open as long as the exposure button is pressed. This allows for manually setting the exposure time and allows the photographer to expose for a very long period of time in minutes, say 5 to 10 minutes, more than 30 seconds needs bulb mode. So obviously, you can't stand there with your finger on the shutter button for so long as 30 minutes because you press the bulb button and then you have to keep it pressed uh, for as long as you want the shutter to be open for the shot. So if you plan to keep it open for 30 minutes, you cannot stand there pressing on the shutter for 30 minutes. So you need a cable or a wireless release. This is a cable release and this is a wireless release. To remotely control the shutter by pressing the exposure button on the remote release and lock the exposure and release when the exposure has finished using cable or wireless release. These are great for long exposure as they reduce the risk of camera shake, and one can plan to keep oneself in the photo too. So if you are taking a shot of a landscape for 30 minutes uh, for night photography and you want to keep yourself also in the shot, you can take your remote and walk inside the frame and you will be caught into the frame with the landscape. So with the control in your hand. So astro and night photography are done with while making use of these tools. Then there is a delayed shutter release where you press the shutter but the shutter is not released and it is released after a delay. So what we also have in our camera is the option of a self timer. We can set the camera to take an exposure after a short delay, say 2 to 10 seconds. This is very useful for a long exposure if a cable or wireless release is not available and you want to take a shot for less than 30 seconds. I very often use it even when I want to place myself in the shot. Simply set the option and press the shutter button. It automatically switches off if you have chosen one shot or after two shots. If two has been chosen, then after two shots. In this case, when we sorry once again because the of the technical difficulty which I encountered because the internet was not available. And we proceed from here with the slides. So this exposure is with slow shutter speed and is of 22 seconds. Because of the long exposure, the rough sea is appearing calm. This is the sea. The exposure time can be judged by the length of the rays of these lights. Their starting point indicates where the exposure began and their end indicates where the exposure ended. So the rays move through the frame indicating the duration of exposure. So slow shutter speed blurs the motion as seen by the calm appearance of the rough sea here, and fast shutter speed freezes motion as seen in the previous slide where aeroplane was captured. So moving to creative use of shutter speed, let's see how to use this knowledge creatively. Both shots are technically correct and should not be compared, should never be compared, only that we have used our knowledge of shutter speed creatively here. One may have personal preference and can make use of it depending on what one wants to capture. So for the first shot I used a shutter speed of 1/500, and for the second shot I used a shutter speed of 2 seconds. So in the first slide the fall has frozen and you can see the droplets of the falling water, and in the second shot the fall is so soft and silky and has a flowing appearance. So that is the difference between fast shutter speed and slow shutter speed. Then fast shutter speed are also used for action in sports and for photographing wildlife in action. Set your ISO to auto for now. We can change it when we talk about it in forthcoming sessions. The top photograph is of skaters captured at shutter speed of 1/250, and so the blur. I do not know if you can appreciate this blur, but I can. This shutter speed for this shot was just 1/250, and the children don't appear that sharp in the photograph. The features like eyes, nose, lips, they are not very sharp. So for the next shot I increased the shutter speed to 1/1000, and the skaters were captured in motion, but they appeared to be very sharp because the shutter speed was increased here. So that is the importance of shutter speed. Again, a wildlife capture at a fast shutter speed for capturing motion and freezing the subject in motion. The droplets captured indicate that the shutter speed was fast. So does the sharpness of the captured flying bird. Using fast shutter speeds with telephoto lens is tricky but yields great results. Remember to keep the shutter speed much higher than the focal length that you are using, as talked in the previous sessions. So suppose you are using a telephoto lens and you have zoomed into 600 millimeters, then your shutter speed should be above 1/600, and for subjects in motion I suggest it to be above 1/1200 up to 1/1500. So another use of slow shutter speed, Vishnu avatar was created. So I used a shutter speed for about 1/15, and I asked my son to move his head from one side to the other side at a faster pace, and I captured this shot, and this shot appeared like this. It is a captured shot and not a edited shot. So this is again making use of slow shutter speed here and creating ghostly figures. So all the exposures are of 13 seconds, and you can see that this person is standing on the slab here, but you can see the bars which were at a distance passing in front of him, so that makes it a ghostly figure. Again, the same boy was captured for another 13 seconds, and he moved from this place to this place. It looks as if he's entering the river. A ghost is entering the river. A third shot was taken of three friends standing and conversing, and the exposure was 13 seconds. And because of the blurred images, it appears as if ghostly figures are standing there and talking to each other. So this is how you make use of this video I created by utilizing my 3 shots for a ghostly video. And slow shutter speeds can also be used to create a sense of motion when the subject stands blurred, denoting intensity of motion. Even speed of 1/30 will be enough to create this sense of motion. Suppose you are standing in a market and set your shutter speed to 1/30 and take a shot of the moving people. They will be blurred and they would appear to be in motion. So that appearance of motion can be captured using your camera. Next is camera shake. What is a camera shake? So this is a shot of a donkey enjoying his feast of rice puffs at a shop in Haridwar, and I took this shot as a documentary shot, for this is what you would be buying if you are not very careful from where you buy. So people often ask me, why are my photos so blurred and often seem to be out of focus? Even a small amount of camera shake will cause the photo to be blurred. In spite of that, the advanced cameras are equipped with image stabilization. So even if you have switched on your image stabilization in your advanced cameras, still you will encounter camera shake, because micro vibrations are occurring all the time while taking a photo. The way you hold your camera, image stabilization, shooting while expiration, stabilizing your body and hand, and use of tripod are all that one can make use of to avoid camera shake. But using a tripod is not always possible, and taking all these measures are not always possible. So what do we do for that? When we are using slow shutter speeds, we definitely have to be very stable to take a sharp photograph. If you increase your shutter speed, then you can avoid this camera shake and get sharper pictures. And while taking a photograph, be very careful that whatever focal length you are using, you should be having a shutter speed or above that focal length. So suppose you are shooting at with a 200 mm lens, then your shutter speed should be above 1/200 to avoid camera shake. If you are using 600 mm lens, then your shutter speed should be above 1/600 to avoid camera shake. Then we come to long exposure photography. One of the most fun things you can do by controlling shutter speeds is long exposure photography. Shutter priority is used for long exposure to capture light trails. Long exposure is also used for astro and night photography. Tools that are required for long exposure photography: you need tripods. So you will need a lot of equipment and tools before proceeding to explore your skills for night photography. And there are 100 types of tripods available. They are of different materials, and plastic ones are cheaper but not durable. Aluminum ones are in between, and carbon ones are light and sturdy but expensive. So weight is a very important for you to, and will be the deciding factor while buying, because while traveling you will have to carry them, so that weight will count in. So try it before you buy to get the best suited for you, your camera and your lenses. Suppose you have a very heavy camera and a heavy lens, you will need a sturdy tripod. If you're using a mirrorless camera with a basic lens, then it's a small camera with a small lens, then you can do with the aluminium one. So when we went to Kenya, I took my tripod all packed up, and it was so difficult getting it checked in all into the flights, for you could not carry it to the cabin, and for checking in with the luggage, you had to specify that it should be kept safe and sound, separate from heavy luggage. And I did not open it while traveling. I came back with the packed tripod. So you also require cable release or wireless release for delayed shutter release. This is a wireless release. This is a cable. This is a cable release. This is a wireless release, and you require it for long exposure photography. So for long exposure photography, use a tripod, use cable release, wireless for delayed shutter release. Select shutter priority mode or fully manual mode. If using manual mode, use high aperture number to reduce light for long exposure, f11 to f16. Keep ISO low, 100 or 200. Try at different exposures, 5, 10, 15, 20 second exposure for different results. And choose a safe location where traffic is moving for light trails, or where it is extremely dark for astrophotography. And do your homework to study the site beforehand during the daytime to plan for your shot, and get someone along to be safe. Don't worry if you don't understand what is ISO as of now. We will be talking about it later. So now we come to panning. What is panning? This is a shot where I have panned. So panning is when we move with the subject using our desired shutter speed matching the speed of the subject. So try to match your movement with the subject. Shutter speed of 1/60 or slower will be enough. Monopod may be used, as tripod restricts the movement, and sitting or crouching will help to steady the shot as these shutter speeds. Choose an interestingly colored background to provide a contrast to the subject, and shutter priority is a good option for panning. So here is a shot where I set a low shutter speed, and then I moved along the movement of the moving bird at the same speed, and the blurred background and the sharp picture of the subject indicates that it is a panned photograph. So next session will be what is aperture mode, how to use it appropriately for our shots, and we will understand what is depth in aperture mode. So I have always dreamt of education to be convenient, flexible, affordable, interactive, and learning in your own time, in your own comfort zone, in your own way, from a place comfortable to you without disturbing your life. And I think now is the best time, with so many platforms to use and digitalization making it all the more easy and comfortable. I hope you have enjoyed the session, though I am really sorry for the digital discomfort caused to you all, because we lost connection in the between and resumed with the classes. But definitely, while editing, I will cut away that portion and create a new video which I will upload onto YouTube, and then you can again see it complete without any technical faults. So this is Dr. Archana Tandon logging off. Thank you everyone for logging in and having patience. Namaskar.